Thank you, Chairman Corker, Ranking Member Cardin. Thank you, Secretary Tillerson, for your service and the chance to be with you again. We'll be together later today in an appropriations subcommittee. So in this context, I'll focus on some narrow questions that are about State Department functioning and authorization, if I might. Let me just first more broadly say, my predecessor in the seat, former Vice President Biden, often said, don't tell me what you value, show me your budget, and I'll tell you what you value. And I am gravely concerned that the proposed deep cuts to development assistance and diplomacy suggest we don't value diplomacy and development as tools of foreign policy at a time when we badly need them and need more of them. I think the growing threat we've seen, the attack on our democracy by Russia, the destabilizing acts of North Korea, their nuclear program, and the world's worst humanitarian and refugee crisis since the Second World War, call for us to invest more in diplomacy and development, not to dramatically cut it, but I'll save the rest of that for the appropriations hearing this afternoon. I understand from your testimony you're nearly done conducting a review of the whole State Department. How soon can we expect nominations for the 6 regional bureaus? I'm concerned about some of the difficulty in moving forward key nominations.
We're at about, I would say, the 50% mark in terms of undersecretaries, assistant secretaries, in terms of people that have been identified. Names are actually being submitted so they can begin to work their way through the White House PPO process, but also for a lot of people, they have to get this paperwork behind them, and I would tell you that is no small challenge. As I check on the status of various people we have recommended and nominated to the White House, what I'm finding is more often than not, it's the paperwork that is slowing them down. In my own case, I had to hire 8 people to help me get mine done. Most people can't afford to hire 8 people to help them get their paperwork done, so it takes a very long time. But we're about 50% of the way through, and we have other names that are in process. What we're doing, we try to get the candidate list of people we think are would be useful to talk to down to a couple, and then we actually interview them face-to-face and then make a decision and submit them. So this is a pretty active process. It's one I sit down with the people that are helping me coordinate it about every 10 days just to see where are we, make decisions on other people. If we're hearing feedback, we've talked to folks, maybe they don't want to do it after all. So it's moving, and that's about where we are within the State Department and the bureaus.
It is my hope and expectation, Mr. Secretary, that we'll work on a bipartisan basis to confirm qualified candidates who come forward. I'm concerned about the impact on our embassies in a lot of places in the world that may not be top of the news, but that need an assistant secretary to help coordinate policy. As I've traveled recently, traveled to Uganda with Chairman Corker not too long ago, traveled to Vietnam with Senator McCain recently, I make my best efforts to visit with mid-level Foreign Service officers and with the civil service folks who really run the department, and I'm concerned about the impact on morale of these proposed cuts. One specific concern I've also got is about diversity. As part of the hiring freeze, I understand State has frozen the accession for all current Wrangell and Pickering fellows, and last week all those current fellows were told these classes were on hold indefinitely. And this is one of the premier accession programs in the Foreign Service and has served as a key tool for improving diversity in the ranks of FSOs. These actions taken to freeze the program, to me, could indicate a disturbing lack of attention to the importance of diversity. What's your plans for these programs, and how do we move forward on diversity initiatives taken by previous administrations that are worthy of continued effort?
Well, I'll follow up on it, Senator, but I don't think we've frozen the Wrangell and Pickering programs. In terms of people that are in process, we're continuing, and we're going to continue to take applicants as well. But let me follow up with you because I don't think there's a full freeze in place on
My understanding is they're being asked to make very difficult choices in terms of seeking employment elsewhere while they wait for the next opportunity for an entry-level class. And you can imagine how someone with a lot of skill and ability would find it quite difficult to go take another job while waiting an indeterminate period for an opening in the State Department. In April, I was one of a number of senators on appropriations who pressed for additional money for emergency funds to address famine conditions in Nigeria, South Sudan, Somalia, and Yemen, where there's roughly 20 million people at risk of starvation. And the congressional budget justification accompanying your FY18 request notes unusually high carryover funds. I think the estimate was $1.3 billion in IDA funds. Why weren't these funds obligated in the year they were appropriated by Congress, which was 16 and 17? And what is your longer-term goal? I'm concerned about impoundment and whether or not these funds, which are critically needed to address famine, might instead be reprogrammed or returned as unobligated balances.
Well, first, let me thank the Congress for the big plus-up in 2017 in recognition, as you point out, of some serious challenges around the world. I think, Senator, our intention is to get that deployed in a way that the food shows up, the relief shows up where it is needed. I think what you're seeing is how difficult it is to execute on some of these areas. And so having the money, having the funds are certainly appreciated and needed, but then we have to be able to deliver, working with other aid agencies and working with the situation on the ground to have the aid reach those most in need. Our expectation, as we reflected, just wanting to be completely transparent with everyone, is that we are pushing that out as quickly as we can effectively do that, but that we are going to have some carryover as a result of the plus-up. I think when we get around, it's a broader budget question as to, you know, it is difficult to execute a $55 billion budget for the organization. And so the statement that show me your funding and I'll show you your level of commitment, I do not agree with. Funding does not equal results. Show me your results and I'll tell you your commitment. And that's what we're trying to get the focus in the State Department is, what are the results? And then I'll tell you what I need to deliver on those results. Giving me a pot of money and suggesting that confirms our success and our commitment is just simply, I have to take exception to that. I've never had that experience anywhere.
Mr. Secretary, we may share a view that once money is obligated, we also have an obligation to spend it in the most efficient way possible. I don't think this is an either-or conversation. I think the chairman and I have worked hard to try and find ways to improve the efficiency of delivery of food assistance, and having this funding in the IDA accounts, I believed, was a way that it would be streamlined and move forward more efficiently. I didn't mean to suggest that simply spending proves our values. Spending efficiently is what proves our values. Cutting without a reasonable justification at a time of record famine, I also have some difficulties with. I look forward to our further conversation this afternoon about how we can be more efficient and effective in our support of development and diplomacy.
And I agree with delivering through the IDA program. We believe is also much more effective as well.
Thank you, Chairman Graham. Thank you, Secretary Tillerson, for your service and the chance to be with you again today. I'm struck at the list that the chairman put up and the detailed and thorough presentation he made about the unsettled and dangerous and difficult world in which we currently operate, and the gap with your written presentation and spoken presentation. I see here Russian aggression and conflict in Ukraine relatively prominent, and I did not see that in your written testimony, your spoken testimony, and I'm concerned about that gap in the context of an era when we know that Russia, from the very highest levels, intentionally interfered in our last presidential elections. And in my view, that's only going to stop when we stop it. And I understand we may have a difference of approach to how to engage Vladimir Putin in Russia, but I have a concern about the message we're sending to our vital allies. I am haunted by a question asked of me by an Eastern European diplomat at the Halifax Security Forum not long after the inauguration, where he said, how can we count on you to defend our democracy when we don't see you defending your own democracy? In your confirmation hearing, you acknowledged Russia's ongoing efforts to divide Europe from the United States and to divide NATO and the EU within. And we discussed how you would lead the resources of the State Department to counter Russian propaganda through tools like Radio Free Europe, and how you would invest in strengthening our vital allies in the region, whether NATO or, as has been mentioned, countries like Georgia or Ukraine that are not NATO members. If I understand this right, your FY18 request for Europe and Eurasia is nearly cut in half from FY16 by about $450 million. What is the strategy behind decreasing support for our partners and allies in the region in the face of a clear and growing Russian threat to their democracies and ours?
Well, first, let me position the situation with Russia for you so that you understand what I am hearing from allies, partners, large and small. And this is without exception. I have yet to have a bilateral, a one-on-one, a pull-aside with a single counterpart in any country in Europe, the Middle East, even Southeast Asia that has not said to me, please address your relationship with Russia. It has to be improved. They believe worsening this relationship will ultimately worsen their situation. So people have been imploring me to engage and try to improve the situation. So now that was our approach anyway, but I would just tell you the feedback I'm getting is please engage and see if you can improve the situation. With respect to the tools available to us, we do maintain particular emphasis on the countries that we see in Europe that are most at risk of Russian interference in Eastern Europe. We would like to do more in the Baltics and in the Balkans. If we had a little more, we'd do a little more there, but we've not walked away from those. We do want to continue to perfect more sophisticated approaches as to how to push messages into Russian society, obviously through social media, through broadcast, through all of the tools available to us, and we are going to continue to maintain that effort to ensure we are in the conversation among young people and others inside of Russia. But this, I understand other countries are concerned about Russia. They should be. And I hear about it when I talk to them about how they feel the direct threat, whether they're in the Baltics, whether they're in the Balkans, whether they're in Georgia, or whether they're in other parts of the world as well. So they express that to me, but then when we talk about what should be done, they want us to solve it through engagement. They do not want it to get worse, because if it gets worse, they fear it will be worse for them.
Well, Mr. Secretary, I appreciate hearing that perspective, and we have many of the same conversations, just with a different endpoint. Southeast Asia, Eastern Europe, in the North Atlantic Alliance, I hear grave concerns that the signals we are sending are signals of retreat and of disengagement. Partly this is from countries, as was mentioned by the chairman, a country like Jordan that critically depends on us for support as they bear the burden and costs of a great number of refugees. In other places, it's where either China is being ascendant or aggressive in the South China Sea or in the face of North Korea, or in Eastern Europe, as you mentioned. In terms of an overall budget that is trying to defend American interests and advance American values, I don't see how it makes sense in an increasingly difficult and contested world to unilaterally withdraw support from vital allies who have chosen us and our values and our side in a contest of ideas with Russia, China, and others. Let me mention two other things before I run out of time. As has been mentioned by others, we have people-to-people programs like the Fulbright scholarships that have had a big positive impact and that elevate the reputation we enjoy in the world. Africa is a very young continent, a very large continent where China's omnipresent. The Young African Leaders Initiative is a relatively modest in-scope program that has had a big impact. I thought it was, again, not the choice I would have made to cut all the educational and cultural exchange programs in half, and YALI would be one of them. I hope you will reconsider that, because I think these are powerful programs that connect us to parts of the world where we benefit from a positive relationship and from, as you said, that next generation of leaders. Power Africa is also something that we, on a bipartisan basis, authorized through the Electrify Africa Act. It is a way for us to bring the deployment of private sector capital and American expertise to sub-Saharan Africa. Your budget proposal allocates an 84% cut from the FY16 enacted level for this. There are a dozen other programs I could talk about that I think reduce the visibility and the scope and the reach of our investment through diplomacy and development. Those are two I just wanted to elevate in our conversation today. Let me close just by quoting an editorial that I thought made an important point. A senator said in this editorial, "To view foreign policy as simply transactional is more dangerous than its proponents realize. Depriving the oppressed of a beacon of hope could lose us the world we have built and thrived in." This is, of course, by Senator McCain. It was written on May 8th. I'd ask for unanimous consent to be submitted for the record. I am concerned that in a world that is increasingly unstable, and where there is a clear contest between authoritarian capitalism and real capitalism, a democracy that is a capitalist society, that we need to step up our game. And I agree with increasing our defense investment, but I think to do it without also sustaining or increasing our investment in diplomacy and development is ill-considered. And I really hope that we will work together to advance human rights, to advance diplomacy, and to advance development through this budget. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.